discussion which focuses squarely on the institution of slavery and how it's tied to tourism, particularly. So, I want us to do a deep dive this evening. Everyone wants to come to Jamaica and feel all right, right? I mean, at least in theory. Of course, there are concerns over the crime rate with our widely reported killings, scammers. I mean, Jamaica is probably notorious now for young people scamming old white people out of millions of dollars. A lot of people are afraid of those things. And then you also have the people who are not necessarily eager to visit a country where the infrastructure may not be what they are accustomed to in more developed countries. A lot of people are concerned about that. Jamaica is still, after all, classified as a third world country. But still, if you ask the average foreigner, would you like to visit Jamaica? Most would say yes. Most would want to visit the land of Bob Marley. In their minds, we have perfect white sandy beaches, smiling, dancing locals, endless sounds of hypnotic reggae music, rum punch, jerk chicken. And of course, for many Jamaicans, this is a source of great pride. We are still, in many ways, the jewel of the Caribbean. And every year, millions of tourists spend top dollar to immerse themselves in our unique and vibrant culture. So it's not really surprising that rarely do we pull back the curtains of the tourism industry to examine some of its unpleasantness, its history, its purpose, and its effects on us as a nation. Truly, if you really think about it, Jamaicans have a long history with the concept of hospitality. When Christopher Columbus visited the islands in the late 1400s, he remarked that the inhabitants were kind, welcoming, extremely generous. He said they had beautiful skin, they were mild mannered, even went as far as to say they were cowardly, they weren't violent in any way, and that he was welcomed with open arms. But this hospitality, this Jamaican hospitality of 1492, took on a dark shade as Columbus's trip became what I think was the blueprint of what later happened in the Americas. The total genocide of a people, the total exploitation of its resources, the plummeting, and of course, eventually slavery. Slavery, transatlantic slavery, the Black Holocaust, where millions, hundreds of millions of African people taken from Africa and brought to Jamaica to serve, to generate wealth, to help the white planters extract the resources and to turn those raw materials into something profitable for which they would use to live a high life, to live a life of complete luxury, not only in Jamaica, but in Europe as well. Slavery set a precedent and created an appetite for servitude, domination, sexual exploitation. Where did this appetite go? Can't we see that so much of this desire to be served, to be dominated, to sexually exploit others This appetite is being fulfilled through many aspects of the tourism industry. I mean, for me, this concept of hospitality is mind blowing. The fact that we have a standard, for the most part, that hospitality or what is expected when people think of places like Sandals, Couples, all these major hotels on the North Coast. The standard is that for the majority, white people, they come to these exclusive resorts and they're being served and catered to and pampered by black natives in ways which are often inhumane. You know, some of the policies are so unnecessary. The way the way you see these people are welcome, the dancers that have fake bottoms under their clothes, fake dreadlocks, dancing and shaking their bottoms, welcoming these white foreigners. It's like a minstrel show. It's scary. It's scary to see the black natives dancing, singing about rum punch and island cool breeze just to welcome white foreigners and to give them is inarguably the experience of being a slave master. No, I know it sounds, a lot of people might think that's going too far, but if you really look at it, it's very obvious. And that's part of the appeal, even in the early days when you have men like Butch Stewart that pioneered this concept of the beach resort. The marketing strategy, the appeal was for people, white foreigners, white Americans, white Europeans, to come and enjoy a slice of plantocracy life. Come and enjoy what it feels like to lay about all day, get your sheets washed for you, your towels washed, have someone black dancing for you, entertaining you, serving you endless amounts of rum. That's the model. That's what they sold them. Come to this resort and you will experience, you'll get a, even if you're not a wealthy white, you will get to experience what it's like to live the plantocracy's dream, the slave master's dream. Look at how they're dressed. Have you seen some of the butlers, their outfits? Have you seen the maids? Their outfits, their mannerisms, they're almost identical to what we see in our history books when we look at various accounts of slavery. This is what's being sold. This is what's being marketed. The seize and plunder of land, the seize and plunder of souls, identities, and culture. And what's the benefit? I believe the last quote was that tourism for Jamaica, the income was close to billions, US billions of dollars. Yes, 3.88 US million dollars. And they estimate that there's going to be 4.2 billion US dollars in tourism earnings. Greetings, Lioness. Welcome. Where is all these billions of US dollars in tourism earnings going to? Because I can tell you, it's not going to the people. It's not going to the people. Most places, these tourist towns, Negril, Montego Bay, Ocherius, the people still live in abject poverty in the midst of all these tourist resorts, in the midst of all this luxury. The people still live in abject poverty. When you walk through the towns of Ochi, you're still stepping over sewage running in the streets. The place is still filthy. The garbage is not collected on time. So, what is the purpose of these billions in US dollars that's being generated through the exploitation of a people, of a culture, through the selling of the plantation fantasy? Come and pretend to be master for a weekend and have young bucks dance for you and serve you up coconut water and rum punch. They might as well say that. They might as well say that. I want to read an excerpt from an article, a New York Times article from a author. It's a quote from an author. Her name is Dennis Ben. She wrote a book called Here Comes the Sun. And she's always had very seething criticism of the Jamaican tourism industry. Let me read an article. This is from the New York Times. It's called Encountering Another Jamaica. When people come to the Caribbean, they're being funneled into this journey of the airport to the resort. And that's all they see of the country, said Riaz Phillips, the author of the award winning cookbook West Wind's Recipes, History, and Tales from Jamaica. Usually, if you follow the money trail of that passage, it doesn't lead to any tangible benefits for the people who live and work in those countries. Nicole Dennis Ben, who wrote about the dark side of Jamaican tourism in her debut novel, Here Comes the Sun, explained that it can be hard for Jamaicans to start successful businesses. It's really impossible if you don't come from wealth already. You're not going to find much ownership among the Jamaican working class, she said. Even many of the white sand beaches that foreign visitors enjoy are off limits to residents and are instead controlled by hotels and resorts, which limit access to their guests. Of the island's approximately 493 miles of coastline, less than 3 miles are designated as public beaches, and about half of those are used in association with hotels, according to a recent government policy paper. The public beaches that do exist are often run down and not fit for use. That exclusion is emblematic of what some locals feel is the continuing legacy of colonialism and the history of slavery on the island. Yes, it's I see Lioness in the chat saying, whoa, a lot of people, even though we know issues that we have, somehow to hear it statistically, it's always a bit jarring. Leighton, I see you have raised your hand to speak. Would you like to share your opening thoughts?
Yes, I am so grateful to you for raising this topic. And the only thing I would wish to say is that a few years ago, a chief executive from some tourist body international tourist body came to Jamaica. And it was extremely embarrassing because he did not hold back. He said we have one of the worst cases of tourism apartheid in the world. And he lit into the people. I mean, you could feel the embarrassment on the TV screen because Ed Bartlett was there, Minister of Tourism, and, the bigwigs and hotshots in the tourist industry. And this guy did not hold back. And he used the words tourist apartheid or tourism apartheid. And he said Jamaica was one of the worst cases. And basically, what he said at that forum is echoed in everything that you've said in your opening, Keisha. That's it.
It's really sad because there are countries in the Caribbean where you cannot have private ownership of the beach. And yet in Jamaica that is so widespread. It's frightening. It's frightening. And I remember I don't when I was a child there was a song by Brian and Tony Gold. I forget the title of the song. But essentially it was talking about apartheid in South Africa. And his friend, he was reading from a letter from his friend who is saying, can you go to any beach you want to? Can you stay out late at night? You must be living in paradise. And even then, as a child, I remember the distinct feeling that this isn't much different in Jamaica. And now, as an adult and as an attorney, and you look at things like the Beach Control Act, which has been in existence since we were a colony of England, that has not been significantly altered to give the majority Jamaicans inherent rights to the beach. Section 3(4) of the Act says, no person shall be deemed to have any rights in or over the foreshore of this island or the floor of the sea, save such as are derived from or acquired or preserved under by virtue of this act. I mean, as Bob said, didn't my people before me slave for this country? That we don't even have inherent rights to go to the beach? That's crazy. There is no general right of fisher folks except in certain circumstances. People can own beachfront properties. And the property rights under the Beach Control Act, if you really look at it, a lot of it is just there to serve powerful property owners. And if that weren't enough, we have things like the tourism tax incentives for hotel owners, 10 years tax free for people who own hotels. So these millions of US dollars, billions US dollars that are being generated by the tourism industry has no tangible benefit for the majority of African people that have built the country and have built the very culture that they're selling. And that is what I find most disturbing. But question, Leighton, how much of this you think is associated with slavery strictly, or the idea of capitalism and being a self-made man? Like, you know, I remember some couple years ago there was this excitement that Kanye West bought some island or bought some mountain. This idea of owning beaches, even the idea of people like Butch Stewart being self-made men, and they have the right to enjoy and to capitalize on all the benefits that have been accrued by their wealth. What do you think of that? Leighton, are you with us? Seems like Leighton stepped away.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hadn't unmuted my
Oh,
mic.
okay.
I I think that that is true. Let me share an experience with you. When I was at law school in Barbados, we used to go down to the beach, not far from campus, a little down the highway and down a hill. Lovely beach. It was called, I think, Plantation Beach. Uh, it was right on the hotel front. The hotel was abandoned. It was at the time we were there. This was in 1995. Uh, you could see that it was recently abandoned. And sometimes on our way to the beach or at the beach, we would just stroll through. Well, it wouldn't be ruins, but it was just there. And the Barbadians used to look at the Jamaican students a kind of way because Butch had bought the hotel. And when he realized that Bajan laws would not allow him to restrict the beach to the hotel guests, he simply did nothing with it, just left it derelict. And the impression I got was that the locals were, had been initially happy when he had bought it, the part of the Sandals Caribbean experience, and didn't realize that that was what the Sandals Caribbean experience came with. And they're very proud of their public beach access. I mean, all the Bajans can enjoy their beautiful beaches. And, you know, I think they felt like as Jamaicans, we ought not to let Jamaican pirates feel emboldened after pirating Jamaica to come and pirate the other Caribbean islands. Um, but you raised something interesting, Sikish, and it reminds me of a famous passage from Franz Fanon about how the colonized man looks with envious eyes at his colonizer's woman, his colonizer's house. And so there is a deep, deeply embedded desire within black folk to enjoy the plantation experience as well from a white person's point of view. And you hear tourist workers all the time say that the black American tourists are the worst, the most bossy, the most obnoxious, the most demeaning. And I suspect that part of their ire is that ire of the Jamaican workers is that they don't want to be bossed by a black person, whereas they would be much more amenable to being bossed by a white person. But the flip is that, of course, so much of the time, black guests are more obnoxious than white guests because they want to assert their right to quote unquote white treatment. And so you have a situation where And what's true of the Black American tourist is also true of the Black Jamaican tourist. A lot of the times, you know, the thirst, the quest for, you've earned it and you deserve to get a slice of plantation life. And when the majority of our people, especially the majority of that class of people who can feel free to aspire to plantocracy living, when a majority of those people uh, start to turn away from that, then we'll see a change. Until then, we'll just see more of the same.
You know, what you said reminded me of an incident that took place. I think it was late last year. There is a video that was made by a Jamaican woman who returned to Jamaica and set up a rustic kind of resort. And she made a video saying how distasteful most of the Black American guests are, and that she's not eager to serve them, and that in fact she would rather they not come. And you know, they attacked her, they dragged her, but then you had a lot of people who were agreeing that these a lot of the Black Americans who come as tourists, they come with that very same attitude that you described. And I can say personally, working in the hospitality industry as a restaurateur, I never liked this idea of how customer service was described or marketed. You know, it just had this nasty underbelly of uh, servitude and abuse. And I always felt that this is a relic of slavery. And you would see it, of course, mostly amongst Americans, specifically Black Americans. Other groups of people, of course, are tainted with the view. But this idea of the customer is always right and you must come to my table with a smile. And if you don't smile while you're taking my order and hop, skip, and jump on the way to meet me, that's bad service. You know, it's not as though they were saying, oh, some servers are a little bit more friendly, but they were literally saying that in order for them to mark you as having good service, you had to be giggling with them, borderline flirting with them. And I said to myself, where is this coming from? Where is this appetite to constantly be served and validated through the person just simply bringing your food from the kitchen to the table? I always found it strange. It's one of the reasons why I gave up restaurant life, because that concept of service just never sat well with me. Kush, I see you have joined us. I know that you spent some time professionally in the hotel industry. Can you give us your thoughts on how some of the hotel and tourism policies or experience that you may have had and how it relates to the topic? Go ahead, Kush. Not sure if you heard. Okay, seems as though Kush has stepped away from the mic. You're with
No,
us,
sorry,
Kush.
my mic wasn't coming on. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Good night, everyone. Yeah, I missed most of the introduction, but I, I, I personally worked in the in one of the industry that fall under the tourism sector, which was the hotel industry. And it's one of those is one of the tourist industry is one of those industry that is kind of touchy. When it's almost like the mining industry, the bauxite industry is kind of touchy when it comes to Jamaica, because these are the main so-called providers of revenue. Um, I guess for working class people, not necessarily for the country, but I guess for working class people, so it kind of touchy. But um, it is slavery in a sense. But I guess w- working there, you feel good because at least you're working for a international company. Um, like the call centers, it doesn't really teach you much. You don't really learn anything much in these industry,
Were
really.
there any specific policies that they had that you observed
It
as a
says,
worker? Any of the specific policies that were there at the hotel for you as a hotel staff that you thought were a bit exploitative or had some remnants of slavery?
hold on, let me turn my mic because I wasn't hearing you.
No, I just wanted to know if your experience in terms of being a worker, if the hotel had policies that you felt were exploitive.
As a part of the workforce, there's nothing much you can expect the exploitation of your labor. That's really what's going on. They go to the deep um poverty stricken area to collect us as early as morning light or as late as the night is, to exploit our labor, to give us what the government or what they instruct the government as well to give us, which is minimum wage. Um, Majority of the workers are there on contract, meaning you're not entitled to anything. And the few that are there that gets the little benefits, um, it's related to nothing, you know. So as a part of the big industry, it's really just there to exploit the labor of the masses of the people, with giving you back little to nothing. It's few of us that work in the industry can say they can be a Cushite as a company, because it's a competitive thing. Um, so we can't even say, boy, they could become a company, because it's a lot of hotel and a lot of chefs and a lot of waiters, a lot of waitresses. So at the base of it is just to exploit the workers, and also the country doesn't get enough. The port fee per head for people coming to Jamaica is one of the lowest in the Caribbean, or the Caribbean has the lowest in the world. So just the fact that just my mind over the place, but just to point out something is, Jamaica signed off to some agreement. I'm trying to remember what the agreement was. Probably about 2-3 years ago, that solidify the the idea of the tourist industry controlling the minimum wage sector, and how it is increased or decreased our leverage, with the backing of the EU. As soon as I find the agreement, I'll send it. But it also solidified the port fees, or the per head fee per tourist that comes into the Caribbean. So it keeps the Caribbean country income at a certain level, or economy at a certain level, while the ports, I think, is like, what, probably like $10 or less than $10 a head, while outside is like $18 to $20 or up to $50 per head. So at the base of it, the tourist industry is really just to exploit the labor of the people, which in slavery you could do it, but it would have called rebellion. In modern day slavery, I call it wages. So that was my experience.
Okay, thank you for that, Kush. You know, in respect to the issue of training and workers, one of the similarities I see with slavery and the tourism sector, especially again in these towns like Ochi, Mobe, Negril, it's almost like apprenticeship because none of these towns, the young people are not being trained or developed in any other skill or area, save and except those that cater to tourists. So all of these places you can train to be a chef, whether it's a chef at the hotel, a chef on the ship. You can train to be a diver. You can train to be a butler. You can get your license from the Jamaica Tourist Board to drive around tourists. But there's no real development outside of that of our young people in these fields. There is no development for anything when as it relates to technology. And it's very scary because we're literally developing, quote unquote, these cities to be servants. We have a city full of servants. And Leighton, in your story about Butch Stewart and the Bajan people and how it was viewed that he felt emboldened to do what he had done in Jamaica, in Barbados, it reminds me of the other aspects of tourism that I see, particularly in Ocho Rios, which is how a lot of the Indians have come in and taken the lion's share of shops and stores, even restaurants that are catering to tourists whilst using Black Jamaican culture. So if you go into the malls or the shopping plazas, you'll see stores with names like Yaman or Bob Marley, Blessed Love, all of these titles and these names that are obviously being taken from Black culture, but their workers are treated poorly. They don't invest into the town. The town is still filthy and run down, as I said. None of these shops are owned by Black people. Once the ship is docked, all the Black people do really is take a small fee from them to transport them from the port to the Indian man's shop or to the non-Black owned restaurant, or to if it's within the hotel setting, you might have one or two Black persons who are there to just chop a jelly, but the in terms of getting any benefit from the 4 billion US dollars per year which is generated from this industry, it's laughable, really.
And addition, additionally, sorry, not to cut. Additionally,
Go ahead,
these
Kush.
sectors. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. These sectors actually um kills culture, or it turns culture in a commodity. And these race or these minorities in the country, they have no problem turning the culture into commodities. So, for example, even inside the hotel industry, the culture, whether it be a positive or negative of the black culture, it's turned into a commodity for white entertainment. So the Rastafari culture or movement is expressed in the hotel. So you'll have Jamaican night where you have Bob Marley music playing, the most revolutionary music playing, but it turns into a form of entertainment, which leaks into the society. You see? So every culture is everything about the society gets ruined. Not only just on a ecological level or just economical level. The culture itself gets ruined because of tour or because of the freeness of tourism. So you can't stop persons from wanting to go to a next one culture country and visit and experience the culture. But the fact that the hotel, the capitalist structure control tourism and they are doing it only for profit, they are the one who controls the the culture, how the culture is expressed. So you go on the road now outside of the hotel industry and you see people with locks or um red, gold, and green. Marcus Garvey writing, and all of this now becomes an entertainment or a way to get profit with no meaning behind it anymore. So it kills our ruin culture.
Thanks, Kush. Um, so I don't know if my point was clear before. I realized I didn't I didn't expand properly. But basically what I was saying is that I feel other races, namely Indians and Chinese, have now become emboldened to do what has been done to black Jamaicans for centuries without remorse and with no checks and balances. And I see it happening everywhere. And as Kush said, people aren't talking about it because they just want some crumbs. Taxi men are fighting for crumbs. Who can get the first tourists off the ship? Who can take them to Blue Hole for $20, for $25? That's what we're fighting for. No one is really seeing that these groups are living off or culture or sweat or toil or everything, and there is no tangible benefit for it. And our people, every decade it gets worse. The people are not being trained in anything valuable that can actually benefit our country. And it's very scary. It's very scary, even when you consider the rise in artificial intelligence and the fact that so many of these jobs are going to be replaced very soon. What training will our young people have? What entrepreneurial ideas or spirit can they hope to develop under these circumstances when they're literally being forced into a life of glorified servitude? As Junior Reid said, them release the chain, but them I use them brain. And how do we as a people, I suppose this question is for you, Leighton, how do we as a people who have come through slavery start to distance ourselves from I love that line from Chronic Song where he says, even the place where you want to live sweet, a capture land, there is no title feet. A lot of us still want to go to these places and live like the former slave masters, even if it's just for days or months or weeks. How do we begin to disassociate ourselves from that and to see the dangers or negatives in that, Leighton?
Um, it my response is going to be sound simplistic, but we need to re-look at our heroes and what we deem important. So we have to look, for instance, at the pioneers of the all inclusive industry as really anti Jamaican and against the best interests of the Jamaican people. Once we get our framework, our philosophical, ideological framework intact, then everything else will follow from that. As I get older and older, I realize that so much of our maladies begin, or if they don't begin with, they are continued through the Ministry of Education. Um, because it sets the stage for the curriculum, the syllabus, the whole everything sets the tone for the world view, the nation view of the population, the young population. And the young population does not see itself as self deterministic. It sees itself very much as trying to get a toehold, a foothold in this system that exists, which is completely Babylonian. There's one thing that always concerned me from I was a child. Anytime any advocacy is being made for Black people's betterment, it was always couched primarily in terms of how much more productive it would make them. So you never speak in terms of, yes, daycare at work would be a great thing. It would ease the stress. No, it would make the workers more productive. And that is that's the be all and end all. And once the workers themselves start to advocate for themselves in that way, it would make us more productive. Then you buy into the fact that you are nothing more than a commodity. Your life, your efforts, nothing more than a commodification in service. And I think I like the word you use, servitude, uh, to, this notion of this plantation. As you rightly say, Kish, none of it goes back to the towns, the people who work in the tourist industry have to have dormitory housing in hovels and slums, God knows how far away from the resort, and it goes on and on. And I share your concern that so many years after, I shouldn't say so many years, but every year is another year, and we only seem to be becoming more backward than ever.
I think part of why it's so difficult for people to have that mental shift, Leighton, is this sense of futility of being descended from slavery. You just will never have the amount of money or wealth or power that a Butch Stewart will have or a Joey Issa will have. Because for the average black person, we didn't own, we're not benefiting from being compensated 20 million pounds at the end of slavery, And these people are shown to children as the stalwarts of the nation when we know that if you go back and you look at the title for the land that they are claiming is theirs, or the source of their so called wealth, this idea of old money is blood money. Certainly, and in a plantation, old money is blood money. And I feel like a lot of young people, a lot of black Jamaicans just feel like this is their lot. And the best they can do is see how they can get some crumbs off of it. So you best go to heart and train to be a chef and see if you can get on that ship. Because at least you'll have some adjacency to powerful white people. At least you, as Kush said, at least you will wear the company shirt that says Hilton, Rose Hall, you know. So I think that's part of the mentality. And so much of what we went through during slavery, we still have not healed from. We still have not healed from this idea that we are naturally inferior. We are not capable of running things by ourselves. We are not capable of existing without their approval. And so it becomes extremely problematic. Yes, and as Kush said, it's very hypocritical when you enter Norman Manley Airport or when you're leaving Norman Manley Airport and you see Bob Marley's face splattered all over the walls, knowing the discrimination that Rastafari face in the country, or just poor people in general. Think of Air Jamaica and the fact that dark skinned women couldn't be air hostesses. For years, that was the case. Everybody knew it. And yet, these are institutions that we praise and act as though they are part of our development and part of our identity. And it's extremely scary. Kush, what would you say is the attitude that you get from ship workers? Do you feel like it's a sense of I have arrived, or are they very much aware of the situation that they find themselves in? Kush, hearing, or you stepped away? Seems as though Kush may have stepped away. So I want to go on to talk about a few other aspects of the tourism, the dark underbelly of Jamaican tourism, and that is sex tourism. As I discussed in my opening, so much of the appetite for sexual debauchery and sexual enslavement that was cultivated on the plantation, we always have to ask ourselves, where did this appetite go? Did it just disappear after 400 years of people having access, unfettered access to young girls, young boys, young bucks at their whim and fancy? Where did this appetite go? Remember, a lot of these so called noblemen from Europe or rich men from Europe, they would come to the plantation to experience and live out their fantasies. And some weren't noble, some were common criminals and so called ruffians of the day that came to Jamaica to become, and they lived out their wildest, dirtiest sexual fantasies for 400 years. And nobody could stop them because it was law. These people weren't humans. So when slavery was abolished, and we see institutions like tourism and the resorts popping up, we know for a fact that sex tourism is a big part of the pull for why a lot of foreigners come to Jamaica. Not even talking about the rent a dread situation. I'm talking about people come to Jamaica to be able to sleep with 12-year-olds, to have 13-year-old girls in their rooms. Leighton, do you think people are aware of this, or is just one of those dirty secrets that we pretend that doesn't exist?
Well, Keish, we have so many dirty secrets we pretend don't exist, but I'm sure enough people know. I'm sure enough people know. There's also this thing where so many young girls just want a white man to breed them. They just want to have a pretty baby. They don't care about the guy's number, address. Will he ever come back to Jamaica? And some people have told me, white people, men, that when I tell them, say, me just want to give me a baby, just want to give me a baby. They just want, well, as many sexual encounters they figures might make it happen, but they just want a chance at one just to have a close to white baby. Um, but I remember an attorney who lived in Hanover telling me how many years ago this been now? 2009? Yeah, about 15 years ago. Telling me that he didn't know what was gonna happen to the nation because basically almost all the young girls in the tourist home were sex workers. So it's been known and it's been around, and we turn a blind eye to it the same way we turn a blind eye to incest and prostitution of schoolgirls in the general population.
What's scary is because of our colonization and enslavement, and the fact that we have in our minds the image of God as a white male, I observe that white men's behavior with black children don't come under much scrutiny in Jamaica. So I can't tell you how many times I've been at a beach. There was one time I was in Portland, and there was this old white man in his 60s with some young black girls, like probably two or three of them, could be eight, nine, or 10. And I'm just thinking to myself, no one looks as confused as I feel. No one seems to question, why is he with these little girls? Who are their parents? Does he have permission to have them out? They just live so freely because no one is gonna check them because of their white privilege. I was in Cafe Blue the other day and the same thing. Old white man sitting with a black child, a girl child, having brunch. No one seemed concerned. And it's really scary for me because these people, what happened in the 1700s is still happening now. And they know it. And not only do they know it, they seek it out, they come here for it, and our people romanticize it. I want to read you a clip from the description of the Rose Hall Great House and Garden Tour that's online. Immerse yourself in the heritage of the island as your expert guide shares the story of this colonial ruin, restored to its former majesty in the 1960s. Learn about the lifestyle of the European bourgeoisie in the Isles of the Caribbean in the 18th century. The tale of the Annie Palmer, the famed White Witch of Rose Hall, is sure to delight. Beautiful tropical gardens and personalities will color your experience with fun along the way. You see what I mean when I say that these people are not just buying tickets to enjoy beach, rum, and reggae. They're buying tickets to really live their ancestors' experience. Imagine beautiful tropical gardens and personalities will color your experience with fun along the way. That sounds like an advertisement for a slave. A personality will color your experience. You don't even say people, professional assistant, something. Tropical gardens and personalities. And this trend, I see that Minister Bartlett wants to jump on this idea of dark tourism, where people are being invited to come and look at the Georgian style buildings and the old plantations, and we want to sell this experience as part of our culture, is extremely problematic. If you notice in this advertisement, there is no mention that Rose Hall was a slave plantation. And they're glamorizing the lifestyle of the bourgeoisie as though this lifestyle wasn't made possible by the transatlantic trading Africans. You see? So it's really problematic because again, we are so distracted as a people by bread and butter issues. We just want crumbs from the tourism pocket money that we don't even see how we're being exploited. Kush, are you back with us? I wasn't hearing you earlier. I'm not sure if your mic is working now. But if you have any thoughts on how the tourism industry is being advertised, I would love to hear them. And again, I just want to say thank you to the others in the room. Michelle, it's so nice to see you here again. Ian, I see that you're new here. I'm going to invite you to speak in case you are interested in sharing your thoughts with us. I see you wrote something in the chat. Until a man is properly fed and clothed, he cannot concern himself with problems facing his country. Really, Ian? That's an interesting perspective. Until a man is properly fed and clothed, he cannot concern himself with problems facing his country. Don't you think that's the mindset of a slave? That sounds extremely problematic. I mean, feel free to elaborate if you wish, but as you have it written here, that sounds extremely problematic. For the one thing, for first of all, it says until a man is properly fed and clothed. It's written in a way that suggests that there's somebody else's responsibility to feed and clothe him, as though someone is to come in and feed and clothe him. And until that person or thing or institution feeds him and clothes him, he cannot concern himself with the matters of his country until he can. So this is a slave then. The person you're describing is indeed a slave. And I would go to far as to say that this is less than a slave, because even slaves were concerned with their emancipation. Even the slave were in constant planning for revolution and rebellion and running away. To say that you can only concern yourself when you're fed and clothed is very strange. Kush, did you want to elaborate in the stage? I see you're in the chat, but
No, it's fine. I was just saying that, I do agree with you. The idea that the reason why after these things are going on, especially even the tourist industry itself, is because of a lack of is a defeat, and is a show of defeat. I think the only issue is that African people are the African majority in Jamaica and the Caribbean, because I don't want to when we limit when we our leaders, Marcus Garvey, already told us that we don't have boundaries as African people. So I don't want to start to take on the boundaries through the propagandas of saying Jamaica and the Caribbean and this place and that place, because it kind of put us in a position of ultimate defeat, because we can't stand up against the system that be. So even though we will have discussion about what's going on within black people. Sometimes the development around them cause them to react based on the development, right? So when I want to speak about the whole entire African people, because the tourism industry affect the entire Caribbean, and a lot of the times the people them get uprooted and get placed into these things and not even know that they're in it, because they do have a leadership, or the leadership that's around them is leading them into that direction, right? And of course, because of the lack of love of self to lead them to the right leadership that's already there, right? So yeah, the tourism industry affect the entire region, which is predominantly black people. It's just a shift in the mode of operation. So now the three major cruise ship that brings people to Jamaica outside of our airlines is the same ownerships of the persons who own slavery in the Caribbean, or was exporting or importing slaves through the Caribbean. It was three main cruise line is still in charge of what's going on in the Caribbean, and our government act that way. So several years ago, about 500,000 people was uprooted out of the rural area of Jamaica and they bring them into the city. That also forced whoever was left, or forced them to be a dependency on the tourism industry, because it cut farming, it cuts everything. So we have to go through this thing on a political level. And as I was saying in the comment, we kinda, because of our hatred of self, we kinda think that what we need is outside of us. And I want to make that practical. Right now, they're making clothes from banana, the husk of banana. So if we think that if we decide to withdraw from these entities, that we're going to be closeless, it's a illusion. It's just that we don't. I don't even know why we don't want to do these things anymore. Um, but our resources is around us. But again, we have a political push that is pushing us towards tourism, pushing us towards mining. It's a very, very, very heavy push, I should say. You know, so that's what I was trying to put out in the comment, that even though a man need to clothe himself, and until that time, first we have to first start to love ourselves, or say some kind of value in self, and see that if we withdraw, because we have to withdraw from the system, um, the hotel industry turn over into the call center, which again teaches our people nothing at all except to answer phone, but yet still is our revenue. it's a paycheck for them to buy things. So, how are we going to combat this push of government and the capitalist system?
I think it's very much possible and also important that when we're looking at an entire system, that we can also narrow down different areas. It's just like if the body is sick, we know that in order to heal your body, you have to heal your entire body. But if the tumor is in your lungs and your liver, there's nothing wrong with narrowing down your focus on those areas. And yes, we acknowledge that the issue of tourism, modern day slavery, is something that is widespread across the diaspora. There are things very specific to Jamaica, like our beach laws, our beach access laws, that are worth discussing. And I don't think we should just dismiss it to say, oh, the minute you mention Jamaica, you're using limited geographical bounds. But it's certainly an example that we can use. Ian, I see you have joined us to speak. Did you want to elaborate on the point you were making earlier? Please go ahead. Ian, just unmute your mic. I believe it should be to your right. Just tap on it and unmute it so that you can share your thoughts.
Yeah, blessed love everyone once again. Yeah, so what I mentioned earlier on, yes, no, it is kind of, you know,
It's breaking up a bit, Ian. So could you just project for us so that we can hear?
hold on, give me a moment, because I'm in a bad spot
No
right now
problem.
with the connection. Just give me a
No
moment.
problem. Late fixed.
Yes, Kish.
If we don't get our bread and butter issues fixed, we don't have an obligation or realistic obligation to address the issues, the political and other issues concerning our country. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that bread and butter issues a lot of the times are the impetus for people to get involved. Uh, the story of revolution uh, is of people who are not being fed properly, are not being clothed properly. The labor movement is about people uh, joining together, combining, collaborating, fighting for proper wages, for proper working conditions. And at the time, they weren't being properly fed or clothed, obviously. So it's
That's funny.
dangerous.
You remind me of
Mhm.
the notion of the fact that I've never heard of an army of fat, robust, well-fed warriors. I mean,
In,
the Vietnamese soldiers were allegedly eating half a bowl of rice a day when they whooped the Americans' ass. So I
indeed.
don't know how we're going to be
And
well fed and fight the system.
to to
Hello?
to
Anyone?
balance my may I?
Yes, go ahead, Leighton.
To balance my commentary though, in relation to Ion's statement, the history of revolution also shows that revolution has been all over the world, has have been pushed by persons who are people who were not on the absolute lowest rung. There is a notion that it is more your advocacy for change is more strident, more organized, and more effective when you have a notion of what that change should be, when you have a taste, however small, of what a foretaste of what might be possible, what might be achievable. And so people who are so denigrated, so denuded, so dehumanized that they can never look up and see further afield, but are just pecking, pecking, pecking like pigeons for whatever crumbs are around them, are people who will never be in a position to form any revolutionary uh, idea or grouping.
That's a good point, Leighton, because Marcus Garvey and Castro weren't necessarily on the bottom of the barrel. Ian, you wanted to share with us now? You ready
Yeah,
for us?
yeah. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what was who is it? Leighton had you know, just mentioned. I was explaining to the ones is exactly the point of view that yes, I myself I'm concerned with issues facing my people. However, when I analyze and look into it, I can see where this affects the rate or how much of the ones them are able to reach that place. So that is the reason why I made that statement. And I kind of make it left a little dry. I never really explained thoroughly what I meant, but Leighton just did that.
Okay, thank you for that, Ian. Kush, did you want to respond? Hello, Kush, did you want to respond?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. What's the question?
No, we were
Sorry,
asking if
sorry.
you wanted to respond to Ian.
No, what did Ian said? I didn't hear him.
Okay, so both Ian and Leighton agree to some extent that it's difficult for people who are completely subjugated, in complete abject poverty and beaten down. It's very difficult for people like in that situation to concern themselves with revolutionary thoughts. I wanted to know if you had a response to that.
Uh, well, I do agree. I do agree with that. Uh, um, I think Marcus Garvey took that perspective of trying to make sure the people who are doing business are included. I think the only difference is that we have to redefine it. What is making once the people them know so them can be clothed and fed and okay, then we can deal with our most urgent issues. Is just to redefine it. As I like to use China as an example, not necessarily how it normally used. You know, um, we remember China being that place that we hated, where at least the media hated it. Um, Child labor, exploitation of people working only, not getting paid, slave labor, rarity, all kind of nonsense. And all that was really happening, it was that Chinese decided that they were going to find some way to clothe and feed themselves. That's all. That's what they decided. That's what the leadership decided, and it was expressed to the rest of the people. So it was defined. They defined it themselves. They didn't define it as we need material from this country or we need material from that country. They defined for themselves. So we have to We have to first define these things for ourselves before we know what it is. Because if we tell our people, say, well, they
But
need
is
to
that a
defend
fair
themselves.
comparison, Kush?
Sorry?
China to the is China a fair comparison to the Caribbean?
Well, that's
The Chinese have are still on their land. The
well,
Chinese
that's
still have their language.
perfect. That is what now we are diverting from, because this is not something new. This the question of, or the fact that China has their land and their culture or their language is not a new debate or a new question, but it was being addressed, but we're drifting away from it. So it was addressed when we said we don't have any borders. So what it did, it didn't give us it gave us access to resources wherever we are as a people. But when now we start to divide ourselves as with borders, now we have to buy from Trinidad. We have to utilize the system to get resources. So we found a way how to make, as them like to say, turn lime to lemonade, or turn lemon to lemonade. We found a way to turn the lemon to lemonade. We didn't speak the same language, but what we spoke was the same exploitation. We had the same exploitation. We experienced it the same, no matter where we were, and we could communicate on that level. We're drifting away from that. Now we have certain philosophies that kind of change us from that kind of thinking. So even though China had their language, had their land, we also had advantage, which should have ultimately took us back to our land, because we if we follow history correctly, then we will know that the United States bombed Russia for trying to bring weapons or information or whatever to the Caribbean. So there's something that so we need to understand there will be a war if we decide to take the Caribbean. Not that we can't say we can't fight a war, but we just have to know that there will be a war. Um
Yes, coach. Oh, coach, now hear me. Coach, you
so
hear me?
yeah, we have
Yeah. So no, just that you just
Just a
mentioned
minute,
that a while
Ian.
ago, and
Just a minute. Just a minute.
okay.
Leighton, I'm curious though. Perhaps you can help me with this. This idea of Caribbean, our history in the Caribbean specifically. 400 years of serving white people with our labor, with our bodies, with our talents. That has been our specific history in the so called Caribbean, the so called West Indies. How do we go from that? Remember, our bread and butter issues are being dealt with by the very same machinery that's exploiting us. A man have to eat food. In Ochi, the taxi man eat food when him carry the tourists from the pier to KFC, which is not black owned. So how do we sort of fund our freedom or engineer our freedom if the very thing that's going to address our bread and butter issues is what's enslaving us?
That's such an interesting question, Isha. And I, well, first let me mention that it is we have to understand and accept that in order to achieve the benefits of collective action, there must be individual sacrifice. In order to achieve the benefits of collective action, there must be individual sacrifice. In the labor movement, you'll always have persons who will cross the picket line, who will be strike breakers, because They're just looking at the next dollar. They're not looking at the next dollar 10 years down the road. And so, and this is one of the reasons that all these movements always have great and charismatic leaders, because it's necessary to galvanize people to get them to look past their noses to see what actually lies in front of them. The second thing that I want to mention is that same Barbados thing where our beaches belong to Barbadia. We were always taught that Barbados was Little England, that Barbadians were docile, etc., etc., etc. And I'm wondering what it is in our historical development, since, as you mentioned, we have the same legacy of 400. Barbados actually has it worse, because at least the people who went to Barbados went there to establish England in Barbados. The people who came to Jamaica were just like on a holiday jaunt. They were what stay in Jamaica, stay in Jamaica. So the Barbadians actually ought to have come into a society that was more stratified, more restricted, more marginalizing, and yet they have a fierce, our beaches are for Barbadians, for black Barbadians. And until we somehow get a notion of that, even in relation to our beaches alone, even in relation to just our beaches, if we were able to get that, then we could begin to have a notion, you know. Um, the thing with spreadsheets is you can set up a spreadsheet that once you change one value, the whole every value in the spreadsheet changes. And if we could develop within ourselves a value that is intrinsic, that says this is good, not to make us a more productive cog in some mythical Jamaican economic machinery that does nothing for me or my family or my children. Um, until we have a notion of a life that we desire, that is good for us, that we can build ourselves and defend and celebrate for ourselves. Until that key value is imbued, grown, grafted, somehow made present in us, then we will just continue along this woebegone path.
It also feels as though embedded in us is this notion that certain people deserve nice things. So in Ocherius or other parts of St. Anne, the natives seem completely unbothered that everybody have to pack up on one dirty beach or a few dirty beaches, and you have to pay top dollar to enter into the quote unquote nice beach. They seem unbothered by it because why just if you're not a money, you just not a money. Not a money, you just go to the poor people beach and top man carry him girl go expensive beach. And I think to your question about what's different between the Bajan attitude and the Jamaican attitude, I think Jamaicans have this ball out um and this love affair with inequality where we feel like it's perfectly right and just that certain people should be excluded from certain experiences if they cannot afford it. And that's a serious seriously pervasive attitude amongst our people. So we don't see anything necessarily wrong with it. But I want to read some comments in the chat before I get to Ian and then Michelle. The common man, Lioness writes, but the common man already believes his life is a sacrifice slash struggle. Why would he inflict more on himself? He's looking for a break. It's a hard ask. Kush says, so tournament can work, but the government has to control it. Linus goes on, also, with the lack of examples, every uprising failed. Every upsetters and revolutionaries got put down. I'm so sorry. I'm not wearing my contacts. What is to inspire the common man to go against what already exists, especially as what exists is how it exists? I just saw Jamaica run. Ian, you wanted to respond to something earlier? Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I was trying to mention that being properly fed is not just by, food directly, food, but even information then, you know, and to the system that we are present in and the information that is fed, you know, from the system, it is in a specific narrative or direction. No, we are affected by diverse cultures and information, that we have access to every day, you know. So what Kush basically did say earlier on, say loving yourself, when we come to love ourselves, really love ourselves, then we can, care about each other. Then it is also a part of it that we still don't know what love is for ourselves, or our value ourselves enough then.
Thank you. Michelle, you wanted to give your contributions to this topic? Please go ahead.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. Good night. Thank you, Keisha, for the cricket in the background. It reminds me so much. I'm like, "Ah, I wish I was in Jamaica to hear those, but thank you. Um, you said something, Keisha, about uh that talks to the speaks to the mindset, right? I was watching some garbage reality TV show, and one of the black celebrity was saying she gets so much flack because she gives her child, her daughter at the time, the life that she has built, right? She has wealth now. And so she gives her daughter certain things. And she gets so much flack because it's like, no, you have to struggle. And she needs to struggle, and she needs to struggle, and she needs to struggle. And it's this thing that made me start to reflect. And we look at our culture, it's this thing that we're constantly being beaten in our head about. We have to struggle in order for us to succeed. And it's nonsense. It's a nonsensical topic that makes no sense. Who said you have to struggle in order for you to even quote unquote succeed, right? And we know that success is basically in the eye of the beholder. What you defined as success is not what I define as success. And if it's the case, then something's wrong, right? Because then you're not thinking for yourself. Somebody else is thinking for you. Um, but I wanted to just comment on that statement that you made, and I was like, it speaks to that, where we're being told over and over and continuously being told, right? In school, we're basically, and I'm not speaking to acquire, I'm not speaking to a bunch of people who don't get it, right? In school, we're taught to be workers, right? We're not taught to be business owners. We're not taught to know and navigate the space where We don't have to work hard. We don't have to be banana farmers or whatever the case may be, which is nothing wrong with it, right? We are taught one side of the coin. You need to be a you need to be a farm worker. You don't need to be a farmer, and that's not the case. Why is it that I can be a farm owner? Why do I always have to be a farm worker? What's wrong with that equation? So it all goes back to
But you see, Michelle, a farm owner is going to always have. You can't have a farm owner without the existence of a farm worker. So we have to understand that in the system that we're describing, one man's dream is another man's nightmare. And to say that, perhaps we need to differentiate struggle versus sacrifice. What are we willing to sacrifice? Are we willing to sacrifice this concept of ownership? Ian, please mute your mic. I'm getting some feedback. Are we willing to sacrifice the concept of ownership, the concept of how we define luxury? Why is luxury being served by other people? Why is the absence of struggle? Why does that automatically mean the presence of someone serving you? You see? So I believe we have to redefine things for ourselves, as you said. Because why do we need to own farms? Why does any individual, black, white, or pink, have to have a monopoly on food growing, on beaches, on rivers? It's a perverse notion of success, in my view. And the idea of growing your own food as being a struggle could also be argued to be a perverse notion of struggle. But I'll give you a chance to respond, Michelle.
yeah, and that's the thing, right? That I said that what's being taught to us is that there's only one side of the coin, right? We can only be farm workers, but we can't be farmers. And the reality is some of us can, and some of us may want to do either to manage the food, right? But we are not given that choice, is what I'm saying. That's the unfortunate thing. And we accept it as it is what it is, or it's just that way. And it's not. We need the choice. We need to be given the choice, or people ought to have the choice for them to choose. Do I want to be a farmer? And again, we know that society can exist with just everybody being a chief. It doesn't work. It cannot. It will not work. But naturally, right, some of us will choose to be workers, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need people who can actually grow food. We don't want to put people in a position where they can't grow food, but that's what they are told they need to do. And I think that's the case with Jamaica in large and point, where people are not necessarily, and I don't want to make a blanket statement because that's not true for everybody, but I want it to be the case where it's a choice for everyone whether or not they want to go and, I don't know, be paid to go to a beach, right? Using that as an example that you had brought up before. And that, even that, speaks to a different type of mentality, right? Where uh, they talk about, here in the U.S., that Black people is the only one that wears luxury. We try to project our success by paying for certain things, whereas other other groups, they don't. So it's the same thing. It could be, again, don't want to make a blanket statement. It could be the same thing where the locals or the natives, bless the local who are left, um, will think that because they're paying the top price, or they're paying this ridiculous amount of money, it gives them the status that makes them, look better in society, that they're paying to go to the beach, that they ought to have for free. And the reality is, some of those other fancy people who are going to those beaches, they're not paying to go to those beaches. They're not. They're not. But it's only in our heads that I see where, and this is something I had to unlearn, that things don't need to be this way. And if you continue to do it this way, it's basically a dead end. You're never going to achieve that quote unquote success, that the mythical success that they put. Again, been away from Jamaica for a while, so I don't want to speak with absolute, because things are definitely much different than it is here in the US. But for us, it's a mythical thing in the sky, where it's like, do all these things and you're gonna get there. But I see remnants of it, rearing its ugly head in Jamaica, where you think that wearing the latest Gucci, you think that paying the top dollar, you think that throwing out money is gonna, make you the best man. I don't know. It's not. And we ought to get out of that mindset. It doesn't exist, and that's not success. Again, my my definition of success.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Leighton, how does this concept of choice work in countries like Cuba, where everybody has to do some amount of farming? So much of prime property is owned by the state. How does it work?
Well, before we go to Cuba, let's talk about football for a brief moment. So many of the top clubs in the world are owned by billionaires. Abramovich, the Russian billionaire, Chelsea and Man United and Arsenal and so forth. And one of the most successful clubs in the history of football, perennial Bundesliga winners, Bayern Munich, many time European champion, is owned like 80 odd percent of Bayern's shares are owned by the community, by the regular man and woman on the street. It's it's incredible. And, um, I I struggle with socialists or socialist advocates because of their failure to provide real examples of socialist success, even in capitalist economies. Because it's a socialist model that Bayern Munich, th- I mean, arguably the most successful club in history, European club anyway, in a capitalist society, is commonly owned. And if you look at the decisions, how they fire their coaches, how everything is run, it's run by the people. Whatever executives are there is run by the people. So let's get back now to Michelle's system and choice. There is no choice in a capitalist society. Um, there is only the choice as to who you'll be exploited by. So we have what, six commercial banks in Jamaica. What you gonna do? Play hopscotch when NCB take your money or charge you extortionate rates? You go to BNS and then you find your way to Sagicor and then you find your way to, because all of them eventually do the same thing. It's an oligopoly. And they tell you all the fancy names for it. It's collusion. Under capitalism, the wealth tends to accumulate more and more generation after generation in fewer and fewer hands, and the advantages that each generation builds up are amplified and multiplied from generation to generation. So, what we really need to do is accept that we have no choice in this system and then make the choice to create a new one. It's not fair to look at people who behave as Romans do while in Rome and then tell them that they ought to behave differently. They're trying to get along in Rome just like everybody else. At some point, a decision has to be made to create an enclave within Rome that does not subscribe to Roman ideals, although it is able to coexist in Rome. And that was the beauty of Rastafari, to be a bastion, an outpost of a different way of life, while still, in a way, coexisting with the dominant culture and trying to find an avenue for supplanting the dominant culture with the culture that you with a proper one. So until we have organizations that teach our young, very young, uh, of a different way, until there are debates amongst young people in schools as to whether Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley ought properly be called national heroes, ought properly be recognized as national heroes, until, for instance, there's a debate as to who chooses our national heroes, what are the criteria, and what do we regard as heroism in a national context. What is the place of African Jamaicans in a national context? Why do we refer to Indian Jamaicans and Chinese Jamaicans and Syrian Jamaicans, especially when we talk about dress and cuisine, and we don't speak of African Jamaicans? We have to interrogate our whole philosophies to understand why it is that we have no choice, why it is that we are conditioned, brainwashed, directed, and eventually subjugated and demoralized. And we need to recognize that we can't do it with the 50s and 40-year-olds. We have to develop amongst us a cadre of people that somehow are able to indoctrinate our young differently from this system indoctrinates them. That's it.
Thanks,
So,
Leighton.
Keisha, can I just comment on something?
Sure.
So, while, um, so democracy, right? Democracy, most people don't understand that it's a theoretical, just like concept, just like communism, socialism, all of those things. What happens is you have a lot of people who take it and they just run with it. So just taking democracy as an example, or if you want to call it capitalism, capitalism on its face, it's a survival of the fittest model. That's what it is. So that's exactly what it is. And a lot of people don't understand and get that concept that that's what it is what it is. No matter how you play the game, that's how the game will always end, where it's going to be the one percenters and then you're going to have the people on the bottom. That's if you study capitalism, that's what it is. Democracy is something that requires constant change in order for it to remain in that theoretical realm, right? People have to constantly vote, people have to constantly do this, yada yada yada. You get the concept. Socialism, same thing. No matter which isms you throw out there, it requires that constant maintenance. Um, and with the, I get it. You're saying, okay, these people have no option, but I will say they've seen this playbook before. They've seen what happens to Jamaica when we sit and we do nothing and we accept the status quo. We've seen that. And what's being passed on is we're going to be passing this on to our children. right? I don't agree with the the what the 50 somethings and the 40 somethings can't do anything. Yes, they can. I mean, we've seen it right now. The leaders in our government, they're in their whatever age. You can look at it, and they're not leaving. That's a whole different
And they're
topic.
useless.
And they're exactly right. And they're passing on and still continuing the old doctrine, the whole doctrine, the old doctrine. No, at some point, in order for you to get to where you're talking about, somebody, many of us or many bodies have to say enough is enough. It's time for us to change. It has to happen in order for it's not going to just miraculously fall out of the sky and happen. It has to happen. And we have to be the one teaching the next generation to say, okay, we've been there, we've done that. Here's history. Learn from history, don't repeat it. This is a different direction. Here's an option for you to go in this direction. You don't need to go in that direction because we've done this before. We've seen where it gets us to. But that is not happening. It's like, oh, yeah, let me continue to create my legacy that I don't really care if it affects the common man or woman. I'm just going to create a legacy because that's what I want to do. And I'm just going to continue doing that. And nobody's going to, question me. Nobody's going to argue with me. That's what's going to be done. And what I'm saying is, it's time. We've seen this before. We've seen this playbook play over and over and over again. It's time for someone to do something. It's time for, many persons to do something and change it, create an option, create something for this younger generation that you're talking about to learn something else other than the same playbook over and over and over again. Now, with regards to the African Jamaican and the Syrian Jamaican, I will say that's a slippery slope. When I was growing up in Jamaica, I was just Jamaican. That's it. Nothing else. Everybody around me was just Jamaican. All of a sudden, there's this African Jamaican and Chinese Jamaican. I will tell you, look to the US. We're no different if you go back into history. The US is an experiment, the Caribbean is an experiment. I can tell you right now what creates the biggest division in the US is that very same thing, where people will say, oh, no, 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 you're not African American because you're not born here. Well, no shit, Sherlock. I know that. I'm Jamaican, right? But you go to work, you go outside, anything that you do, that classification that you're an other is stamped on your forehead. And it wasn't something, I don't know. I wasn't around, obviously, none of us on this thing was around back then. But I can tell you it's a hallmark poster child for segregation that creates division. Every single time I walk out the door, someone looks at me, you're black, right? I'm Polish. I'm Irish. I'm this. I'm that. And what does that create? I'm better than you. That's basically what it says. And you're lower than me. I don't have to listen to you. And it's a slippery slope that I personally do not want Jamaica to head in. We are
But
out
but
of many one
Michelle, but
people. I
Michelle,
understand that.
Michelle,
Go ahead.
if in a country that prides itself and has even inscribed its national motto as being out of many one people, then it shouldn't be a slippery slope for us to say, well, we are Chinese and Jamaicans over here. Those are African Jamaicans. Those are Indian Jamaicans. That's the very basis of the lie, which we've been told that we're all one. We've been told that we're all one because for the very reason that we're all different. So I don't see why acknowledging acknowledging the ingredients of a thing can cause discrimination or segregation. I would venture to say that it's quite the opposite. When
I
you
would tell
act
you that
like when you act
I will.
people are worthy of their ancestral title, when a Chinese shop is a Chinese shop, but an African shop is just a cook shop, then that's when you find problems. And frankly, there has never been a time in Jamaica where Chinese Jamaicans weren't referred to as misogyn. Never, ever, ever.
And I agree with you, Keisha, but I'm telling you, I live in the poster child for that, and that's what it does. While many people intention to go out and say, okay, you're just, I acknowledge your ethnicity because a Chinese look like a Chinese, like there's no, there's whatever, but it creates it, whether intentional or unintentional, it does. That's all I'm saying, that good intentions sometimes end up bad, and that's all I'm concerned about. Because I'm never, let me tell you something. My grandfather is, his dad is from Scotland, and I never knew that my grandfather is quote unquote white. Never knew that. Because what? He was just my grandfather. It wasn't until I stepped on soil, the American soil, that came up, where I'm now having to question and think about my ancestry and all of this stuff, and never knew that I was falling down that slippery slope where it's now going to divide me from the rest of my peers, right? Now I'm not just Michelle walking in a room. I'm Michelle the Jamaican who or has a Scottish name, and she's not that's the slippery slope that I'm afraid of. Good intentions sometimes end up bad, and that's all I'm concerned about.
Leighton?
Um, I live in a Jamaica that is segregated. Without the African Jamaicans who are at the bottom of the pile ever calling themselves African Jamaicans. I live in a Jamaica that has a Chinese church in New Kingston. A Chinese church, like not a church that Chinese people go that people say that's a Chinese church. A church that have Chinese church on it. I live in a country that has Chinese cemeteries, that has a Chinese benevolent association, and that celebrates annually the impact and whatever traditions of Chinese culture and its contribution to the Jamaican melting pot. We all go to Chinese restaurants in Jamaica. I've seen the Indian Jamaicans celebrated. They have a special day where the first ship of indentured laborers came over, and we know all the contributions to our cuisine and everything that the Indians did. Same with the Syrians. What happens is this: every contribution that they have made that's recognized as the Syrian Jamaican influence, the Chinese Jamaican influence, the whatever Jamaican influence, is something that is beneficial to the Jamaican experience. So we have this myth that we tell ourselves that, oh, there's no Chinese Jamaican, there's just Jamaican. Really? And when it's the really bad part of Jamaica, that part is what? We all know. The African
Blackity black.
Jamaican. Just cool now, man. We all know. Dirty black Jamaican, Booger Yaga, what have you. That's what Jamaican is. And anyway, the notion that a white Jamaican, like the McConnells who come off the ship with the pen and venables, have the same right to Jamaicanness as the people where Bob say slave and build this country is it's not a slippery slope for me. I totally reject it. I completely reject it. And the reason that we are not concerned that 90 odd percent of our beaches do not belong to us is because we have not wholesale rejected it ourselves. That's my thoughts.
Before you turn off your mic, Leighton, I had a question for something you said earlier. Because I accept that people often talk about socialism without giving successful examples. But you mentioned Rasta as an example of a group that can exist in quote unquote Rome while rejecting Roman ideology, or paving a way for a new ideology. But to what extent can we say that that route doesn't work? Because eventually it gets co opted by the very ideologies that it's trying to live independent from. I just wanted you to address that little point there.
Uh, well, in addressing it, I would have to hark back to a point that Michelle made, where she said that every system has to be guarded. And this is a reason that history is taught, and this is a reason that heroes are venerated, and issues kept alive. It's the reason why Castro, even after he became a statesman, wore military garb so that people could know how their freedom was won. And the only way for that to happen, Keish, for that co-optation not to occur, is for leadership to have integrity and vision, and the ability to insulate or guard the organizational philosophy and operations from that sort of insidiousness where you become like the animals in Animal Farm.
Thanks, Leighton. Kush, I see you had removed the mute from your mic. You want to respond to anything?
Yeah, I just want to add a lot was said that so just want to add my 2 cents. Um, to number one, that line this was hinting about the government being a part, or basically the ones that are spearheading the exploitation of the people through tourism, which is true. With a double-edged sword, because government is supposed to control tourism, in my opinion. You know, I think even the fact that in Saint Anne, for example, Mobi as well, these tourist resort or tourist areas, you have a whole heap of independent drivers around there. This could be very controversial. 'Cause it was independent drivers around there out there waiting for the white season, right? Now these you have too much drivers out there. You have too much men standing out there with their hands in their pocket, waiting on some shillings to do, and they're doing nothing. We're not creating nothing. A whole generation wait on people for shillings while the resources are being taken out by the mining company and being sent to men that are actually doing something with the dirt. Zin? So the government should control that. So that resources, instead of making an individual being able to build the sky of Babel, if you want, the Tower of Babel, if you want to travel the whole entire continent, the whole entire globe 500 times, him cannot do that at the expense of the nation growing. We're not saying can't do it, but not at the expense of the nation growing. So the government should control it, and on the level of the our, because I might not like that. I might not want the government to take away the fact that I can have three bus out there. I might not like that. And that is why we need organization where the government doesn't really care about my personal likings, and only care about the majority. So if I don't like it, either go and work with it, or behind closed door, them go and do what Winnie Mandela do. It's because we have to. The mass of the people is the aim, and the ends, and it brings us to the 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 conflict between capitalism and socialism, or communalism, or whatever we want to call it, because it's a very touchy topic when with both of them, right? Because the capitalist structure gives you an illusion of freedom, and gives you an illusion that all persons out there go and get equal tourists, when the this cruise ship aligned to a hotel, and the hotel aligned to drivers. Everybody cannot get it. It doesn't work that way. But the capitalism system gives you an illusion. Matter of fact, it doesn't even talk about its failures much. So the capitalist system doesn't speak about the millions or the thousands of men who try to get rich and kill themselves. It doesn't speak about that. It only speaks about socialism, setbacks that is caused by capitalism, blockage, and propaganda. So you hear about Cuba problematic with food, very irritated. But when we watch documentaries about Cuba, we see farmers have food till them can't eat no more. Cuba's beach is free for everybody, and Cuba have tourism. So the government should control it. But again, as Ian was saying, there's a revolution that is needed. But again, we have to first know what revolution is in the first place. And to touch a point about Rasta and being involved, and as Daniel said, last the roadmap, Rasta was almost the I don't want to use the word perfect, but a good example of communalism expressed through an African perspective. And as Walter Rodney said, we were the only black expression. Rasta was the only black expression throughout the Caribbean island. And Rasta in Jamaica burned the two-party system. We weren't for JLP, we weren't for PNP. The con that they conned us about PNP, the infiltration about PNP, is that after supporting Manley, that was more towards black consciousness and also towards socialism in his cowardly way. They he had to after him getting weak in his knee because they want to kill him. They made Rasta thought that Rasta was for PMP, when Rasta wasn't a two-party system. Rasta was against two-party system, but because but Rasta was political. They made it seem like Rasta wasn't political, and that Rasta was for two-party system. And they made it seem like politicalism or politics mean two-party system. So the infiltration cause right now most Rasta of PMP have vote PMP, not knowing that what they're unconsciously voting for is the mass of the people, which PMP is not. So that's what happened with the infiltration of Rasta, the movement, because it had to be infiltrated. They couldn't walk around and kill Rasta. Because the more you trim Rasta in the 50s and 60s, is the more Rasta come out. Is them couldn't stop it. So you had to infiltrate it and then outcast it. First, you make them mad by bringing in ganja law. Say ganja is illegal and drug act and rare it. So you exclude them into a small group and make them be crazy by all sector of society. Then you start to infiltrate them pan, and them have to justify themselves, justify them existence through an English expression. So I and I become madness. The expression that was to bind together a spiritual existence, was a physical existence, an economical existence, and an African existence, was turned into foolishness again with infiltration. So you have man, we are relaxed, we are come up with terms that mean nothing. You can't say this, you can't say that. You have to say this, you have to say that. So now the infiltration now stopped us from learning an African language because Rasta wasn't for the world. It was never a world movement. It was a movement for African liberation and for uh if it was for a world movement, it was for a world movement that was on a communal scale where we weren't trying to fit into the system. We were trying to burn down the system and create something new. So, that's I think that's the infiltration happened with Rasta. But definitely with the problem that is facing the society, the only, in my opinion, the only solution would be to a socialist perspective, to propaganda to the people. But getting propaganda to the people means that we need a revolution to take over the government. And before we take over the government in Jamaica, because China didn't take over Jamaica as Chinese, man. The Chinese Benevolent Society actually buys land and buy the places where Chinese do business in. So the government of China actually own these places. The Chinese man just is a middleman for China and just bring the things in from China and make China control the world. But the Chinese government actually own these things. Same thing for India. When you go to the Indian stores and you want to do business with them park you first because it's India products. The Indian government is what is funding that. And the Indian man is working behalf of the Indian government as a middleman. Yeah, him can frolic in a bubble a little bit, but him knows his main objective is African people don't know that. The problem with Jamaican people by not saying African supermarket or African stores two ways, in my opinion. One, the black Jamaican are unconsciously saying that we control Jamaica. Unconsciously. So we consciously and unconsciously pointing out that the minorities do not control Jamaica by saying the Chinese supermarket, the Indian supermarket, we don't say white because again white control the world. We don't say European, but we say Italian and we say X and we say Y. But which we showing that them don't but we consciously don't control the country, and we're unconsciously too afraid to control the country. So we're operating consciously in certain level by calling them what they are. That is the Chinese supermarket. That is the Indian place. And we not saying African is we almost saying that is because we run the place. Because when them say a Chinese man, them can't say Jamaican in their mind. You have to tell them, you have to start speak patois, you have to start tell them they are from long time. You see a black American here, you have to open me mouth for alright, not the black
But
American.
not
And them
only
long
that,
socks they kind of tricky.
not
Alright.
not only that, not
But
only that, but
you see a black person in Jamaica and a Haitian there, anybody there, he have to open me mouth first before you say him is not a Jamaican. So
not only that, Kush. We
oh
also
sorry, 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 sorry.
when we say we are Jamaicans, we are complicit in the historical genocide of the Tainos. We are disrespecting the history and the legacy of the Tainos when we, as African Jamaicans, keep referring to ourselves as the Jamaicans without a qualifier. So, to say that we don't want to be called African Jamaicans, we just want to be Jamaicans when every other ethnic group got a visa to get here and we were dragged here. It's very strange. I also find it strange this notion of Rasta being infiltrated because I find that when it comes to this particular topic as well, we have to draw the line between infiltration and surrendering. At some point, Rasta should have demanded that their images be removed from tourism ads, that their images be removed from the resorts, brochures, and the mockery that is used to advertise Jamaica. At some point, Rasta should have rejected the law of exceptionalism when it came to the rights to smoke and grow ganja. So it's one thing to talk about movements being infiltrated, but we also have to be honest about our surrender and our selling of ourselves. But we're going over the 2 hour mark now. So I'm going to allow everyone to give their final thoughts before we close out. Ian, please, I would love if you could go first. Ian, please go ahead with your final thoughts before we close off this discussion. Okay, Ian might not be ready for us. Michelle, what are your final thoughts?
Um, Boy, there's so much that we can talk about. Um, the only thing I would say is, Jamaica, look at America. It has done some of the things that you're doing, and it's not a pretty sight. As I hear you guys talk about the stores, right? The first thing that comes to mind, and anybody who's left migrated from Jamaica will tell you, none of the foods that we eat are owned by a black person or owned by a Jamaican. None of the foods that we quote unquote get from the that are Caribbean food are owned, sold to us by any of us. It's not. It's either owned by South Koreans or Chinese. All across America, Canada, UK, ask anybody who lives in those areas and they will tell you. Um, with regards to the Jamaica, I can't even, I mean, you guys see it. I can't even tell you how much of Jamaica or what it is to be Jamaica that we don't even own. I see it every single time I walk into a store and I'm like kissing my teeth because a front owned a company that's selling Jamaica products or selling Jamaica lookalike products. We have a problem. And
Because
again,
there is no such thing as Jamaica. That's the issue, Michelle. There is no
that's what,
such thing as Jamaican culture. Jamaicans are dead. What we have is a melting pot of white supremacy, Indian, Chinese, and African culture. We need to just accept that. Then perhaps we can, start to import things from Africa, import things from China, probably, talk about things that we created under slavery. But we keep talking about this imaginary Jamaican identity that doesn't exist. We need to call it what it is.
so I understand that it doesn't exist, which is why I'm saying it doesn't exist and we need to create one. That is what I'm saying. I see it, I experience it, and we need to create one if we want to. I can be the only one, or maybe there's a few others that said we ought to create one, but we need to create one. I'm just stating the reality that when I go to these places, which is why I say it's a slippery slope when we go down that road. The things that you might call yours or you may consider or think it's yours, when you step off that soil, or not, you don't even have to step off the soil. Let's be honest. A lot of the things, majority of the things in Jamaica are not owned by the people who are native, meaning born there and grow up there. None of them own it. Let's be honest. And for me, it's unsettling because I was born there and I go there and I would love to live and die there. But it's not a it's if you want to say Jamaica is not a place, well, it isn't. We don't own anything. Somebody else owns it. So the idea of saying, and maybe it can happen where a Rasta is no longer in those images. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that?
The
You don't
same
own it
way
anymore.
the Muslims demand that Muhammad can't be in a cartoon. The same way the Jews make demands. The same way any other people make demands on their integrity. I don't see any difference. It's just a matter of, are you willing to exert your power? Rasta is one of our biggest exports in terms of cultural relevance. Everything about Jamaica that is culturally relevant, at least 90% of it, has to do with reggae, red, gold, and green, all these things. So, why can't we demand that it not be used or exploited?
Because many of those are probably already owned by somebody else. Again, long topic. Don't want to go, continue going with respect to the time and everybody else, but a lot of the things that we think are owned by us, they're not. And for you to send then say, let's demand that we don't use it, or you're gonna demand for something that you don't own. It's already been patented, or sold by the government to somebody already. You can't.
All right. Ian, you wanted to join sorry, give your final thoughts, no?
Yeah. Just let me know if you're hearing me.
I'm hearing.
All right, cool, cool. So what Coach was saying now with the whole infiltration, you know, not only infiltration, but Rastafari, as you were saying, has to take some of the responsibility, you know, because even though Rasta burn Babylon and burn Babylon and still indulge in a Babylon and I have to, partake, or live within Babylon, then Rastafari has not developed any infrastructure or anything like schools to preserve their culture then and enhance it, that now it could reach a state where it materialize physically in where people could see what Rastafari is about and in a bigger way than just up in the bush, eating idol food, you know. So Rastafari has not come together and made that connection to then represent on that level for even anything to happen then, So just to state that.
Thank you, Ian. Leighton, your final thoughts before we close out?
Um, my final thoughts is that, well, firstly, great topic. And my final thought is that it is sad that most Jamaicans do not see tourism as modern day slavery, Jamaican tourism as modern day slavery. And that is the key and primary issue. Those of us who see it, how can we get the masses of us to see that as well and to be upset by it, outraged by it, enraged by it, and to cause a change in the state of affairs? And our inability to do it is because of how much we've bought into the system. Same way Rasta buy into the system and have Herb Curb, a Rebel Salute, and all that thing. Those are my final thoughts.
Thank you for that, Leighton. Kush, if you're still with us, feel free to share your final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry. Um, final thoughts. I think that. when it comes to tourism, we and these sectors, we have to start look on it as an international, sorry, hmm, as an African problem, you know, um, in the Western world. So we we start to look at them as when them come to Jamaica, them leave and go to the other ports them that they dropped us off, and then we will understand how much work that is needed to even address the propaganda that they use to get the mass of our people willingly going for them um to work to buy sardine. So we have to definitely examine it from um a regional, use the word a regional problem. Also the problem with Rastafari again, which was one of the main vehicles that was supposed to protect the people against these things or to inform the people against these things. And I do agree that there is a lot of responsibility that has to be taken on by the Rastafari brave ones and ones them, because the movement is basically on its knees, not dead. Um, but it opens a door for the movement to get back to the root, which is African people. So when Leonard Oil and the ones them was opening Pinnacle and these places for black people was against the system to come to, it didn't have locks. So our ones could get up, a black person, African person could get up tomorrow morning and say, what, I go up a Pinnacle and me just telling say me a Rasta. And there's no way anyone could identify him. But we just know say he was a black person. So it would allow us to get back to the root of the movement. Um, and also it shows that we need a organization, so it would allow us to be a part of organization that is not Rasta centered. So organization that could paint a school that was built by Haile Selassie, but still address tourism industry that affects the mass of our people. So that's closing thoughts.
Thank you. And what Michelle said, when she expressed her frustration, correctly so, at our ability to really have ownership over things that have been quote unquote robbed from us. I think one of the problems that we face in general as a people, and certainly as it relates to the tourism and slavery issue, is that we often mistake our chains for shiny jewelry. And so we partake in tourism thinking that it's a sign or an emblem of our freedom, of our independence, our ability to spend, ability to dance, ability to eat and frolic with our former masters, not realizing how shiny our chains glisten in the suns. Just gonna read a few words from Linus in the chat. Every hotel groundbreaking has Government of Jamaica representatives in attendance, not to mention when the hotel actually has its opening launch. And it's always a tourism minister announcing how many more hotel rooms are going to be built or which big main chain is coming. The fact that the government of Jamaica is so involved and complicit is a problem. Very true and powerful and moving words. I am so grateful for all of those who took part in this conversation. You gave me a lot to think about and a lot more scope, an idea of the scope of work that we all need to do. So thank you again. See you next week, same time, same place for another discussion on Truth Gangsters podcast. Have a good evening, everyone.